Welcome to American National Government. In this course, you will discuss the purpose, structure, and evolution of United States government.
I'm Jordan O'Connell, History and Government instructor at Northeast Iowa Community College. This lecture distills a decade of my written notes taken from American Government, Roots and Reform, American Government by Lenz and Holman, and our course-assigned OpenStax American Government textbook. This lecture focuses on Electoral College and the Territorial filter. The core question is this: why should a candidate who loses the national popular vote still be allowed to win the presidency because territory counts differently from people? The core competency is to characterize the Electoral College system and other undemocratic features of American government. Why should a candidate who loses the national popular vote still be allowed to win the presidency because territory counts differently from people? The conflict moves through elector appointment, winner-take-all rules, certification deadlines, recounts, and the constitutional decision to give territory direct force. The Electoral College frustrates people because it violates a simple instinct: the person with the most votes should win. That instinct has real democratic force. Yet the Constitution does not operate as a pure national vote-counting machine. It filters power through states, districts, courts, chambers, terms, amendments, and procedures. The Electoral College is one of the sharpest examples. It turns millions of individual votes into state-based electoral votes, then uses those electoral votes to choose the president. It is not a side detail. It is the territorial gate to executive power. The civic problem is that both sides of the argument often cheat. Defenders sometimes talk as if the Electoral College always produces wise federal balance. Critics sometimes talk as if direct national majority rule solves every legitimacy problem. A government course should do better. The question is not whether a past election produced a preferred winner. The question is what kind of democratic system we want: one that treats citizens as equal units in one national electorate, or one that forces presidential candidates to win through states as constitutional units. The Electoral College is a filter between popular voting and presidential power. Citizens vote in states. States appoint electors according to state law. Most states use winner-take-all allocation, which gives all electoral votes to the statewide popular vote winner. The number of electors equals a state's House seats plus its 2 senators. Reapportionment after the census shifts House seats and therefore shifts electoral votes. If no candidate wins an electoral majority, the House chooses the president through a contingent election, with state delegations voting under constitutional rules. That machinery means presidential elections do not reward votes evenly across the country. A narrow win in a large competitive state can carry force more than a huge margin in a safe state. Small states receive extra weight because every state gets 2 Senate-based electors. Campaigns chase swing states because the structure tells them where marginal votes can move power. The framers designed the Electoral College in a world that distrusted direct national democracy, feared demagoguery, protected state authority, and lacked modern parties, polling, mass media, or nationalized campaign infrastructure. They did not choose a direct national popular vote. They also did not design the exact winner-take-all, party-driven system Americans now know. The original design imagined electors exercising judgment. Party competition quickly altered that expectation. Federalist No. 68 defended the selection of president through electors as a way to combine public input with filtered judgment. Hamilton argued that a small number of people chosen for the purpose could deliberate about the presidential choice. That vision did not survive party development intact. Electors now function mostly as pledged agents rather than independent decision-makers. The mechanism remains, but its operating logic changed. State control over allocation is crucial. The Constitution gives states the authority to appoint electors in the manner their legislatures direct, subject to later constitutional and statutory constraints. Most states chose winner-take-all rules because they maximize the state majority's influence. If a state divided electors proportionally while other states awarded all electors to the statewide winner, the proportional state could weaken its own leverage. Party competition pushed states toward the rule that amplified their chosen side. Election administration makes that authority concrete. State officials certify results, resolve recount procedures, handle disputes over elector slates, and transmit certificates according to federal deadlines. Congress then counts electoral votes under statutory procedures. The public often sees only election night maps, but the constitutional process continues through certification, elector meetings, transmission, congressional counting, and potential litigation. The territorial gate is paperwork as well as map color. Reapportionment ties the Electoral College to population shifts. After each census, House seats move among states, and electoral votes move with them. Population growth in one region can increase presidential influence. Population loss elsewhere can reduce it. That means the territorial filter is not frozen. It updates through census math, congressional apportionment, and state-level political change. The alternative models are concrete. A national popular vote would treat all votes for president as part of one national pool. Proportional allocation would divide a state's electors according to vote share. District allocation would award some electors by congressional district and some statewide. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact attempts to use state law to award electors to the national popular vote winner once enough states join. A constitutional amendment could abolish or redesign the system directly. Each reform changes incentives. None removes incentives from politics. Reform feasibility controls the practical debate. Amending the Constitution requires supermajority support, which is difficult by design. State-level allocation changes can happen more easily, but states will consider partisan advantage before adopting them. Election rules are not written by neutral spirits. They are written by actors who know which rule helps which coalition. Article 2 created the original framework, but the 12th Amendment in 1804 reshaped it after the Jefferson-Burr deadlock exposed the danger of the first design. States retained the power to appoint electors in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct, which meant legislatures could use district systems, statewide voting, or direct legislative appointment. During the 19th century, winner-take-all allocation spread because it maximized a state's leverage in presidential competition. The machinery now runs through statute as much as through constitutional text. State election codes govern ballot access, canvassing boards, recount triggers, certification dates, and the appointment paperwork for elector slates. Federal law then fixes later steps, including the date electors meet in December and the procedures for transmitting certificates to Washington. Congress counts those votes in January, and disputes can shift from local election boards to state courts, federal courts, governors, legislatures, and the two chambers of Congress. Reapportionment adds a slower administrative layer. After each census, House seats shift, electoral totals shift with them, and campaigns recalculate which states justify future investment. The territorial filter therefore rests on Article 2, the 12th Amendment, state election codes, census administration, and post-election certification law, rather than on a single constitutional phrase. Presidential campaigns operate inside the Electoral College as a resource allocation problem. A campaign has finite time, money, candidate visits, field staff, polling, legal teams, and advertising. It will not spend those resources equally across all voters. It will focus on states where the margin is uncertain and the electoral payoff is large enough to carry force. That is why voters in competitive states see more ads, rallies, canvassers, and candidate attention. The system instructs campaigns to care intensely about some marginal voters and less about large numbers of predictable voters elsewhere. Winner-take-all rules magnify that behavior. A candidate who wins a state by one vote after recounts and litigation, if necessary, can receive all that state's electors in most states. A candidate who loses by a wide margin receives none. The state outcome therefore carries more force than the national margin. Campaigns do the calculation. They ask where turnout operations, persuasion, lawsuits, and message shifts can convert state popular votes into electoral votes. This creates a legal strategy around election margins. Campaigns prepare recount teams, ballot curing operations, provisional ballot arguments, and litigation plans in states where the margin may decide electoral votes. Lawyers become part of the campaign machine because a few thousand ballots in one state can carry more consequence than a much larger national popular vote margin elsewhere. The Electoral College therefore changes not only campaign travel but also post-election legal work. Small state advantage adds another layer. Because every state receives 2 electors for its Senate seats, less populous states receive more electoral weight per resident than the largest states. Defenders call this a federalism feature. Critics call it unequal voting power. Both descriptions identify the same mechanism from different values. The Constitution treats states as political units with institutional standing rather than as simple containers of people. Reapportionment gives the system a slow-moving administrative rhythm. The Census Bureau counts population. Apportionment formulas redistribute House seats. State electoral vote totals change. State legislatures then often redraw congressional districts, which affects House races and can affect presidential strategies under district allocation in the few states that use it. The territorial gate therefore connects population, census administration, representation, and campaign strategy. Contingent election procedure reveals the system's deepest federal logic. If no candidate wins an electoral college majority, the House chooses the president, but each state delegation casts one vote. California and Wyoming would each count as one state delegation in that procedure. The rule makes sense only inside a constitutional order that repeatedly treats states as units in the federal design. The undemocratic critique also reaches beyond the Electoral College. Equal Senate representation gives small states equal chamber power regardless of population. Lifetime judicial tenure insulates federal judges from direct election. The amendment process lets a minority of states block formal change. Judicial review lets unelected judges invalidate actions by elected officials. These features share a theme. The Constitution filters majorities because the framers feared concentrated power, sudden passion, and state erasure. The same filters can protect stability and minority rights. They can also frustrate national majorities in ways that damage legitimacy. The critique becomes sharper when filters stack. A president can win without the national popular vote, appoint justices confirmed by senators representing a minority of the population, and shape constitutional law for decades through life-tenured courts. Defenders may answer that this is federal constitutional design working as intended. Critics answer that accumulated filters can make majority rule feel ceremonial. The accumulation carries more force than any single device viewed in isolation. The Electoral College is not an accident stuck onto democracy. It is part of a broader constitutional habit of slowing, filtering, and territorializing power. Federalist Number 68 was written as a defense brief for filtered presidential selection. Hamilton promised a process less vulnerable to tumult and disorder, foreign intrigue, and sudden passion because a small body of electors would make the formal choice. That language carried force in a ratification fight where public distrust of direct democracy, large republics, and executive ambition remained intense. Modern practice keeps the shell and discards most of the deliberative core. Parties nominate slates in advance, voters choose party tickets, governors certify results. Electors meet on a federal schedule and sign the state's decision into record. The distance between Hamilton's written promise and present administration is the first pressure point in the source. The second pressure point is legitimacy under loss. Federalist Number 68 defends a system that treats states as essential units in the selection process. Modern critics answer with vote equality and point to elections in which the national popular vote loser became president anyway. Defenders answer with federalism, coalition breadth, and the danger of collapsing the presidency into a single national media market contest. The text remains live because both sides are still arguing over what kind of legitimacy the office requires. The administrative burden sharpens the argument further. Recounts, certification fights, elector challenges, contingent election procedure, and January counting rules all exist because the system is territorial and sequential. Reform proposals such as a direct national popular vote, proportional allocation, district allocation, or the national popular vote interstate compact therefore change more than arithmetic. They redistribute who certifies power, where litigation concentrates, and which political actors can still extract leverage after election night. The Electoral College changes where campaigns travel, where parties invest, how voters experience attention, how states understand leverage, and how legitimacy gets argued after close elections. It also forces the larger question, does filtered consent protect the republic or weaken democratic equality? Judging the system by one election alone misses the design. Does the territorial gate force coalition building across regions, or does it merely privilege a rotating list of competitive states? Does small state advantage preserve federalism, or does it violate the equal civic weight of citizens? Does winner-take-all allocation clarify outcomes, or does it waste millions of votes inside safe states? Does amendment difficulty protect stability, or does it lock the public into a rule it cannot realistically change? The strongest answers will admit trade-offs. Every election system rewards some strategies and punishes others. A direct popular vote would create its own campaign map. Proportional allocation would create its own bargaining risks. Keeping the Electoral College preserves familiar stability and familiar distortions. Reform is not a magic escape from incentives. It is a choice about which incentives a republic should prefer. The administrative question should stay visible to the end. Who counts the votes? Who certifies results? Who resolves disputes? Who appoints electors? Who counts electoral votes in Congress? Who has authority when state and national actors disagree? The fight is never only arithmetic. It is also authority. The unresolved judgment is the one citizens keep inheriting. Should America keep a territorial filter for presidential power because federalism and stability deserve more weight than direct vote equality? Or has that filter become too costly for democratic legitimacy? A serious answer will not hide behind the last election result. It will name the principle it is willing to defend when the outcome hurts its own side. The unresolved question is how long a republic can defend legitimacy when presidential selection separates the national vote from the constitutional result.
If you're curious how I'm using AI to build these lectures and reshape higher education, visit thelibertytolearn.com. I'll see you in class.